Our speaker tonight is going to talk about the Lincoln Heritage Museum over on the campus of Lincoln College. And it's Jonathan Parker. And he's got, we know things have changed over there, so he'll probably field a few questions about that if you've got those. And then next month, please sign up. I can give forms. Yes. The annual dinner is next month at the American Legion. So get a form after the meeting and sign up, and let's do that. We're having Bill Furry is the executive director of the Illinois State Historical Society, and he's going to be the speaker and program next month. So, Jonathan, take it away.
All right. I'm a college lecturer by training, so it's good to be back behind a podium. I've been virtual all this semester. So, Mr. President, members of the Genealogical Society, ladies and gentlemen, I'm also very formal too. Thank you for inviting me to come and speak with you tonight. My name, as Marla said, is Jonathan Parker, and since August I've had the privilege of serving as the operations manager of the Lincoln Heritage Museum here in town. At the museum, our mission is simple but profound: to interpret the life and legacy of Abraham Lincoln and the world in which he lived. If you would advance the slide, I would appreciate it. Well, down on the job already. I'm the successor to Ron Keller, who's still involved with the museum as executive director.
He said to advance the slide.
If you'd move the slide up,
Oh,
I'd
excuse
appreciate
me.
it.
Sorry.
That's all right. Back one.
Back one?
Yep.
Back two now.
Back two now. Yeah. There we go. So I manage with help from an outstanding base of volunteers, some of which are in this room. Barbara Morrow, Kaylee Parker, my wife, Victoria, the assistant manager of the establishment, Curtis Fox, the day-to-day operations of running the museum. If you haven't heard of us, we're located at 1115 Nicholson Road on the campus of the former Lincoln College. Contrary to popular belief and rumor, we did not close when the college did, and happily welcome visitors on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. and Saturdays from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. We are proudly old-fashioned. We only take cash or check, but we promise the history is worth it. Advance the slide, please. The Lincoln Heritage Museum started as the Lincoln Room in 1941, thanks to a rather large donation of Lincoln artifacts from Lincoln University, as it was then known, alumnus, Judge Lawrence Stringer. Our collection grew over time thanks to the generosity of other donors, most notably Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith, the last descendant of the Lincoln family. Slide over. The Lincoln Room became too small to house its collection, and the Lincoln College Museum opened up within McKinstry Library. The space became too small again, and in 2014, the Lincoln Heritage Museum was formed and given space in the Lincoln Center at Lincoln College. We consist of 2 floors. Next slide. Our first floor displays over 100 rare objects like furniture owned by Mr. Lincoln and hand-painted campaign banners from the 1860 election. Our second floor features the immersion experience, which takes our visitors to Ford's Theater on the night of Lincoln's assassination. Visitors then travel with Lincoln as he lay dying at the Peterson House on his life review through our rooms, which recreate Mr. Lincoln's life and times and show how the character of the man and president we know from our history books was forged. The Lincoln Heritage Museum strives to be an educational resource to the community, and we invite all to learn from Lincoln and to live like Lincoln. We hope that you will come to visit us soon. Now, I've prepared some remarks that I've timed and go no longer than 20 minutes, but don't exceed 30 minutes, on the Trent Affair, which was a diplomatic crisis Lincoln had to face at the start of the Civil War. Next slide, please. All right. So tonight, I'd like to take you back to one of the most dangerous moments of the Lincoln presidency, a moment when the United States, already torn apart by its Civil War, nearly found itself at war with Great Britain as well. This was the Trent Affair of 1861. The Civil War had just begun, and the Union was fighting to preserve itself while the Confederacy was desperate for recognition as an independent nation. The Union was anxious to stop the Confederacy from being recognized at almost any cost. Next slide. Charles Francis Adams, son of former President John Quincy Adams, was serving as the U.S. Minister to the United Kingdom at the start of the Civil War in 1861. On November 12th of that year, Adams received a request for a private meeting with the British Prime Minister, who was their head of government. The monarch is the head of state. Lord Palmerston. The invitation read, "My dear sir, I should be very glad to have a few minutes conversation with you. Could you, without inconvenience, call upon me here today at any time between 1 and 2, yours faithfully, Palmerston." Foreign representatives typically met with the British Foreign Secretary, so a summons from the Prime Minister himself was very much out of the ordinary. Lord Palmerston got straight to business when Adams showed up for his appointment. Palmerston told Adams that the captain of the American warship, James Adger, had gotten gloriously drunk on brandy in Southampton and bragged about his plans to intercept a British ship bringing Confederate diplomats to Europe. The British knew that the Confederacy wanted their government and the French government to officially recognize them as an independent nation, and Palmerston let Adams know that any interception by America of Confederate diplomats would probably not lead to any good. Palmerston and Adams did not know that on November 8th, 4 days previous, Captain Wilkes of the USS San Jacinto had captured James Mason and John Slidell, the aforementioned Confederate diplomats from the British mail steamer Trent off the coast of Cuba. Next slide. Queen Victoria issued the United Kingdom's Declaration of Neutrality in the American Civil War in May of 1861 in response to President Lincoln's decision to blockade the South's ports. The declaration named both sides as belligerents, which is a nation or a person engaged in war or conflict as recognized by international law, thereby allowing the British to trade with both the Union and Confederacy. This recognition was the only important concession that the United Kingdom made to the Confederacy during the Civil War. The British never recognized the independence of the Confederacy. The United States saw Queen Victoria's declaration as a betrayal of the United Kingdom's alliance with America and its international opposition to slavery. The Confederacy was thrilled with the Queen's declaration, as they saw it as an opening to get European powers to recognize them as an independent nation. Recognition as a country would allow the Confederacy to borrow from international lenders to fund their war effort. A priority of the Confederate government after this declaration was to send envoys to Britain and France to lobby for full recognition of nationhood. The Confederate states were counting on the power of King Cotton to bring Britain to their aid. Prior to the war, Britain and the rest of Europe imported a full 85% of its cotton from the Confederacy. Nearly 20% of the British population earned its living from the cotton industry, and 10% of the country's capital was tied up in cotton as well. Jefferson Davis and the Confederate government felt that the war would be a short one, and if it went on longer, the cotton famine would bring Great Britain into the conflict to protect her economic interests and rescue the South from Union forces. Next slide. Oh, well, there's a political cartoon illustrating that the British really didn't need the South because they, as you'll hear about later, found a cheaper alternative to Southern cotton by just turning to India. So, next slide. I talked through that one, sorry. The Confederate diplomats Mason and Slidell successfully ran the Union blockade aboard the CSS Nashville as far as Charleston and went from Charleston to Nassau in the Bahamas aboard the ship Theodora. They missed their connection with a British ship to take them to Europe and sailed to Cuba, hoping to find a ship bound for England. They waited 3 weeks, but were finally able to book passage on the RMS Trent when she was ready to sail out of Havana for home. Captain Charles Wilkes of the San Jacinto learned from a newspaper that Mason and Slidell were in Havana and waiting to sail on the RMS Trent. He consulted with his first officer, Lieutenant Fairfax, about the legality of removing Confederate envoys from a British vessel and decided that the diplomats could be considered contraband and legally seized. The Trent left harbor in Havana on November 7th and was found by the San Jacinto on the 8th. Wilkes ordered 2 shots fired across the bow of the Trent. The first shot was ignored, but after the second shot, the Trent stopped. Wilkes sent Lieutenant Fairfax and 20 heavily armed men to board the vessel with the following instructions. Should Mr. Mason, Mr. Slidell, Mr. Eustis, and Mr. McFarland, Eustis and McFarland being their secretaries, be on board, he said, make them prisoners and send them on board this ship immediately and take possession of the Trent as a prize. Fairfax was also instructed to seize any dispatches and official correspondence he might find. Fairfax did not wish to make the situation any worse than it already was, so he chose to board the Trent alone at first. He found the captain of that vessel to be uncooperative, and Fairfax was being threatened by the passengers and crew of the Trent. He had little choice but to order his armed sailors to join him on board. The captain of the Trent, James Moore, refused permission for the boarding party to search his ship, but at this point Mason and Slidell came forward willingly to avoid any bloodshed, and Fairfax backed down as he realized that searching the ship would have constituted a de facto seizure of a British vessel and would have been an act of war. Mason and Slidell formally refused to go with Fairfax, but offered no resistance when being escorted off the Trent. There were no dispatches or any papers of import on the two, as the dispatches had been given to the Trent's mail agent beforehand, who had promised to deliver them to the Confederate authorities in London. The Trent was allowed to proceed to London after, and Captain Wilkes took Mason and Slidell to Fort Warren and Boston Harbor. In the United States, Wilkes was hailed as a hero for his actions. Congress struck a gold medal in his honor. The New York Times declared that the American heart thrilled with more genuine delight than it did yesterday at the intelligence of the capture of Messrs. Slidell and Mason. Others in the North worried that the capture of Mason and Slidell would lead to war. There were many comparisons made between Captain Wilkes' actions and those of the British in the run-up to the War of 1812. Next slide. When news broke in London on November 27th of the seizure of Mason and Slidell, the British public and government were predictably furious. John Bright, a pro-Northern politician, described the public mood as every sword leaping from its scabbard and every man looking about for his pistols and blunderbusses. The British were livid that the United States had disrespected their sovereignty. Prime Minister Palmerston and Foreign Secretary the Earl Russell erupted in fury at a cabinet meeting. Palmerston shouted, "I don't know whether you are going to stand this, but I'll be damned if I do." Palmerston calmed down a bit after that meeting, left the door open for a diplomatic solution. He wrote to Queen Victoria a few days after and said that if, however, the Americans were to climb down and apologize, the result would be honorable for England and humiliating for the United States. All United States Minister Charles Francis Adams could do in the meantime was send letters to Secretary of State Seward to let him know of the mood in London. Adams could not speak on behalf of the American government without explicit instructions from Seward, and it still works that way with diplomats today. The only course of action available to Minister Adams was to wait and avoid Lord Russell. Adams' son and secretary, Henry Adams, describes his father's situation. "I wonder what Seward supposes a minister can do or is put here for if he isn't to know what to do or what to say. It makes Papa's position here very embarrassing, and if he were to see Lord Russell coming along the street, I believe he'd run as fast as he could down the nearest alley." British superiority at sea was unquestioned, but on land it was a different matter. Next slide. Within a week of the Trent crisis taking place, Secretary of War Sir George Lewis proposed sending 30,000 men to Canada. Lord Palmerston instructed the Governor General of Canada to prepare for war. Such an insult to our flag can only be atoned by the restoration of the men who were seized, said Palmerston. And with Mr. Seward at the helm of the United States and the mob and the press manning the vessel, it is too probable that this atonement may be refused. Everyone agreed that something ought to be done in response to America's violation of the British flag, but they couldn't agree on what response to take. William Gladstone, Chancellor of the Exchequer, stated that too strong of a response would leave the Americans with no room to maneuver. Lord Palmerston counted that too weak of a response would give the United States the wrong impression of British resolve. The cabinet decided to leave the drafting of the government's response to Foreign Secretary Lord Russell. Russell's reply stated the facts of the case and demanded that the Americans restore the Confederate commissioners to the British and issue a formal apology within a week of receipt of the letter. If the Americans refused to comply, Lord Lyons, who was the British ambassador to America, would close the embassy and leave for Canada, and de facto state of war would exist between Britain and the United States. The British cabinet reconvened the next day to look at the draft letter. Some members felt that the meaning of the text was unclear, and Russell became defensive. The cabinet agreed to send Lord Lyons 2 letters, one that outlined the basics of the case and the second that contained the threat of war within a week. More disagreement ensued. The cabinet agreed to send 2 letters to the Queen for her approval. And it's thanks to this man, largely, I believe, that we won the Civil War. Because if the British had gotten involved on the side of the Confederacy, we would have been soundly whooped. So the letters arrived at Windsor Castle on November 30th. Prince Albert, the junior-born consort and husband of Queen Victoria, had been kept up to date with the cabinet's deliberations. The paper stuck. There we go. And he was convinced that their reaction would be overly aggressive, and he was absolutely correct. Prince Albert was ill at the time. Officially, he was said to be suffering from a chill, but in fact, he had a serious case of typhoid fever. Yet he dragged himself from his bed, barely able to hold a pen, and amended the proposed text. He felt that there should be the expression of hope that the American captain did not act under instructions, so point 1, didn't act under instructions, or if he did, point 2, he misapprehended them, misunderstood them, that the United States government must be fully aware that the British government could not allow the flag to be insulted and the security of her mail of communications to be placed in jeopardy, point 3, and Her Majesty's government are unwilling to believe that the United States government intended wantonly to put an insult upon this country. So the whole thing was a mistake, and it was a rogue captain acting without any sort of instruction at all. And that we are therefore glad to believe that they would spontaneously offer such redress as alone could satisfy this country, via the restoration of the unfortunate passengers and a suitable apology. So it was a loophole, a very important loophole, but a loophole nonetheless, an exit route that would allow the American government to withdraw with honor. This redrafting by Prince Albert was the last service he performed for his adopted country, and a great service he performed for our country. When he presented the document to Queen Victoria for her signature, he complained, "I feel so weak, I have hardly been able to hold my pen." He collapsed the next day and died 12 days later at the age of 42. Victoria mourned him for the rest of her lengthy life, always wearing widow's black. Lord Russell agreed with the prince's additions and changes, but still doubted that Seward would climb down. He composed a 3rd letter to Lyons outlining the presentation of Her Majesty's demands. Above all, the Confederate commissioners must be released from prison. No apology would appease Britain if they were kept in custody. There was to be no bargaining on that point. So next slide. Seward got Lincoln to call a cabinet meeting for Christmas Day, at which copies of Russell's letter were given to the members. It soon became apparent to them that most were against releasing the Confederate envoys. Public opinion adored Captain Wilkes, and to release Mason and Slidell seemed like surrender. But the economic reality was grim. U.S. bonds were collapsing, and a war with Britain would be ruinous. The cabinet adjourned in the afternoon, agreeing to reconvene the next day. Lincoln, still clinging to the notion of international arbitration of the crisis, asked Seward to present his arguments on compliance in writing the next day, and he would do the same for the arbitration case. But by the next day, most of the cabinet members had come around to Seward's view that the United States had little choice but to comply with British demands, which was very sensible. Seward had been up all night drafting a 26-page response to Lord Russell, in which he clearly laid the blame on Captain Wilkes and his failure to take Trent to a prize court. So he took Prince Albert's way out. Seward showed the draft to Secretary of the Treasury Solomon P. Chase, who seconded the idea of releasing the Confederate commissioners. Sumner was not at the cabinet meeting later that day. He was in the Senate, where a late resolution was being debated not to release the rebel envoys. Meanwhile, Seward outlined his case, then waited for Lincoln to make his for arbitration. But the president said nothing, and the cabinet approved Seward's proposal. When the others had when the others had left, Seward asked Lincoln why he had not made a counter-argument. Lincoln replied, "I could not make an argument that would satisfy my own mind." Seward's official reply complied with the basic demands of the Russell letter, stating that Wilkes acted without orders and that the captives would be released, but there would be no formal apology. The envoys were contraband and could be rightfully seized. Wilkes's error was in not seizing Trent as well and taking it to a neutral port for judgment. In a final poke at the British, Seward suggested that Wilkes, by impressing passengers from a merchant ship, had merely followed British practice, not American, an echo of the War of 1812. However, said Seward, the United States wanted no advantage gained by an unlawful action, and that as far as the nation was concerned, the captives were relatively unimportant. He concluded the 4 persons in question are now held in military custody at Fort Warren in the state of Massachusetts. They will be cheerfully liberated. Your lordship will please indicate a time and place for receiving them. Lord Lyons accepted the diplomatic overture of the United States, and on January 3rd, 1862, Mason and Slidell left for England. Next slide. In England, the American response was awaited eagerly and with some trepidation. On January 8th, news reached London and spread rapidly across the city. In West End theaters, and I talked through that one. Next slide, if you don't mind. I do this in class too. In West End theaters, Benjamin Moran wrote, "Audience arose like one and cheered tremendously. The press conveyed the general sense of relief." On January 8th, the Times commented, "We draw a long breath and are thankful we have come out of this trial with our honor saved and no blood spilt." As for Mason and Slidell, the Times judged them about the most worthless booty it would be possible to extract from the jaws of the American lion. Palmerston wrote to the Queen, gleefully reporting the humiliation of the United States. The Queen took a more measured view. Her speech at the opening of Parliament on February 6, 1862, officially closed the Trent Affair. "The question has been satisfactorily resolved," she announced. And when she announced something, that was that. He was the last monarch of the United Kingdom to have that power. The friendly relations between Her Majesty and the President of the United States have therefore remained unimpaired. When Confederate ambassadors Mason and Slidell finally arrived at Southampton in February 1862, Queen Victoria refused even to receive them. Cheap Indian cotton made the need for continued ties to the South irrelevant, and India was part of the empire, so they could get it much more cheaply and much more readily than they could by dealing with the Confederacy. Mason and Slidell were duly removed from Fort Warren and put aboard the HMS Ronaldo at Provincetown, Massachusetts, and transported to St. Thomas in the Caribbean. On January 14th, the diplomats boarded the British mail steamer La Plata for the final leg of their long and tortuous journey. When they arrived, it was barely reported in the British press. And the nation, like the Queen, was still wrapped up in mourning for the late Prince Albert. Victoria again refused to even receive the visitors. Lord Russell told Lord Lyons, "What a fuss we have had about these 2 men. The soldiers Britain had sent to Canada at great expense remained there for some time. They got bored with little to do. Some even deserted to America and joined the Union Army." The South gained little from the Trent Affair. Late in February, the British government issued a report that acknowledged the effectiveness of the Union blockade. After it was debated in the House of Lords on March 10th, Mason sent one of his first dispatches to Richmond. It was gloomy. The blockade was effective, and no step will be taken by this government to interfere with it. With her honor defended and a cheap alternative to Southern cotton located in India, Great Britain could afford to remain on the sidelines while the Americans killed each other with increasing avidity. In the end, the inherent good sense of 3 men, Prince Albert, Lord Lyons, and William H. Seward, had avoided the looming threat of war between the United States and Great Britain and allowed Abraham Lincoln, as he fervently hoped, to fight one war at a time. With that, I'll take your questions, if you have any. Thank you for letting me speak.
Galen, turn the lights on.
No?
Excuse me, was there any relationship between the Wilkes in this thing and John Wilkes Booth's family? It
Not-
just seemed ironic that there was the Wilkes was mentioned.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
It does, not to my knowledge or that I was able to find. That doesn't mean there wasn't, I just wasn't able to find any connection. Anything else? Curtis?
So these two diplomats from the Confederacy, were they important in their own right, or not?
Not particularly. They were kind of a middling sort of Southern aristocrat.
There's no such thing as diplomatic immunity back then?
Not for a belligerent power.
Oh,
If the Confederacy had been recognized as an independent nation, then yes, there would have been a sort of diplomatic immunity. There would have been for an American ambassador, for instance, but since nobody recognized the Confederacy as a nation, no such protection applied.
Was Slidell from Louisiana?
Yes. That I know.
So this was basically the Confederacy's plan to try to get England to side with them and probably
Fun.
give them monetary
Yes.
things to carry the war.
So our parallels here to our own revolution, recognition as an independent nation opens the door to all sorts of things. If they had been recognized, they could have started taking out loans, asking for aid of economic nature, military, anything. But a belligerent power, which is what the Confederacy was under international law, no such protection applied.
Was this the steward of Stewart's Folly?
The very same, the guy who bought Alaska. Yeah, wrongly, but they didn't.
Want it back.
Yeah. Now they do, yeah.
So what was England's or Queen Elizabeth's thought on slavery? Just, this is
Queen-
a little off the wall, but.
Oh, no, not at all. Queen Victoria was very
Oh,
much against it.
Victoria.
Yeah, she was, very, very much against it. Abhorred racism.
We need more of that.
Amen. Sir?
What was the transport time across the Atlantic between, in those days?
Oh, it could have been a week, it could have been a month. It really just depended. If there was a fair wind and no storms, could have been a week. If they were in the middle of thunderstorms and monsoons, crossing the equator and stuff, much, much longer. It was only really the early 1900s that you could dependably say the ship will be there in a week, and it would have been there in a week. So, yeah, we were at the mercy of Mother Nature for a long time.
Except the Titanic.
Except the Titanic, yes. Yes.
So if this would have happened today, Wilkes probably would have wrote a tell-all book about it. Because he got blamed for something that he probably thought he was doing the right thing.
Yes.
Little humor.
Yeah, there would have been a tell-all.
On Facebook.
There certainly would have been a tell-all.
was the Trent just a merchant ship, or was it a warship?
It was just a little steamer that carried mail.
Oh,
Wasn't a ship of any great importance,
Except it carried the British flag.
except it was a British ship, yes. And it's the same for us today. If you attack the flag, there will be reprisals, even if it's just a little steamship. Well, thank you all. I enjoyed myself.
It was interesting.